What if I told you that the difference between the life you have and the life you want comes down to 4 simple choices you make before breakfast? This is the story of a man named Daniel, and how 4 morning decisions saved him from a life he no longer recognized as his own. Daniel was 32 years old when he realized he'd been living on autopilot for the better part of a decade. He had a good job at an accounting firm, a comfortable apartment, and a routine so predictable you could set your watch by it. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being the author of his own story. He'd become a passenger. Every morning started the same. The alarm would blare at 6:30. He'd hit snooze twice, maybe 3 times. When he finally dragged himself out of bed, he'd immediately reach for his phone, still groggy, and scroll through emails, news headlines, and social media while his coffee brewed. By the time he left for work, he already felt depleted, tired before the day had even begun. At the office, he moved through spreadsheets and client calls like a machine running on fading batteries. Lunch was usually eaten at his desk while catching up on more emails. Evenings blurred together. Takeout containers, television, more scrolling, sleep, repeat. The weekends offered little relief. He'd tell himself he'd finally start that woodworking hobby he'd been dreaming about, or call his sister who lived 3 states away, or take a real walk instead of just moving from chair to couch. But the weekends disappeared into errands and recovering from exhaustion, and Monday always arrived too soon. Daniel knew something was wrong. He felt it in his chest, a heaviness that had nothing to do with his health and everything to do with his heart. He wasn't depressed exactly. He wasn't in crisis. He was just absent, present in body, absent in spirit. One Tuesday morning in September, something shifted. He was sitting in his usual coffee shop, the one 3 blocks from his apartment, waiting for his order. A father and daughter sat at the table next to him. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. She was telling her father about a dream she'd had, something about flying over the ocean on the back of a giant turtle. Her eyes were bright, her hands moving through the air as she described the colors of the water below. The father wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't distracted. He was completely there, leaning forward, asking questions, laughing at the right moments. Daniel watched them and felt something crack open inside him. When was the last time he'd been that present with anyone? When was the last time he'd been that present with himself? He left the coffee shop without ordering. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about that little girl's joy, her father's attention, and his own vanishing days. He thought about his sister, whom he hadn't called in 3 months. He thought about the woodworking tools gathering dust in his closet. He thought about how he used to love mornings when he was younger, how they used to feel full of possibility instead of obligation. Around 2 in the morning, he got out of bed and found a notebook in his desk drawer. He sat at his kitchen table and wrote a single question at the top of a blank page. What kind of life do I actually want to live? Underneath, he began to write. Not goals or resolutions, just honest truths. He wanted to feel awake. He wanted to create something with his hands. He wanted deeper connections with the people he loved. He wanted to stop feeling like time was something that happened to him. The next morning, Daniel made his first decision. When his alarm went off at 6:30, he didn't hit snooze. Not once. It wasn't easy. His body begged for 10 more minutes. But he remembered that little girl's joy, and he remembered the question he'd written. He got up. This was decision 1. Get up when the alarm sounds. It seems almost too simple, doesn't it? But Daniel understood something in that moment. Every time he hit snooze, he was training himself to negotiate with his own intentions. He was starting each day by breaking a promise to himself. That pattern didn't stay contained to mornings. It bled into everything. Getting up on the first alarm was about more than sleep. It was about self-respect. He stood in his kitchen, bleary-eyed but awake, and made his second decision. He left his phone in the bedroom. This was decision 2. No phone for the first hour. His hand reached for his pocket, out of pure habit. The phone wasn't there. He felt a flutter of anxiety, a familiar itch to check something, anything. But he resisted. Instead, he made coffee in silence, listening to the sound of water boiling, the drip of the machine, the morning birds outside his window. For the first time in years, Daniel experienced a morning that belonged entirely to him. No one else's emergencies. No headlines designed to provoke. No engineered outrage or manufactured urgency. Just the quiet rhythm of his own thoughts. He drank his coffee slowly, sitting by the window, watching the street wake up below. A delivery truck, a jogger, an older man walking two small dogs. Simple moments he'd rushed past every morning for years. After 20 minutes, Daniel pulled out the notebook from the night before. This was decision 3. Write for 15 minutes. He didn't write anything profound at first. He described the taste of his coffee. He wrote about the father and daughter from the coffee shop. He wrote about feeling like he'd been asleep for a decade. The words came slowly, then faster. His hand moved across the page, and something inside him loosened. Writing, he discovered, was a way of thinking, a way of processing, a way of figuring out what actually mattered beneath all the noise. When 15 minutes passed, he closed the notebook and stood up. He felt different. Not transformed, not fixed, but different. A little more awake, a little more himself. He put on his running shoes. This was decision 4. Move his body for 20 minutes. Daniel hadn't exercised in months. He wasn't training for anything. He just walked out his door and started moving. He walked briskly through his neighborhood, past houses he'd never really noticed, under trees that were just beginning to turn orange and gold. His mind wandered. He thought about work, about projects he'd been postponing. He thought about his sister. He thought about the woodworking bench he wanted to build. And somewhere around minute 12, he started to jog. Not fast, not far. Just enough to feel his heart beat stronger, to feel his breath deepen, to feel alive in his own skin. When he returned to his apartment 45 minutes after waking up, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt ready. Not for the demands of the day, but for the possibilities. Those 4 decisions became his morning foundation. Get up on the first alarm. No phone for the first hour. Write for 15 minutes. Move for 20. 4 simple choices made before breakfast every single day. The changes didn't happen overnight. This isn't that kind of story. Daniel still had hard days. Mornings when the alarm felt cruel. Days when his discipline wavered. But something fundamental had shifted. He'd reclaimed the first hour of his day, and that hour became the rudder that steered everything else. 3 weeks into his new routine, Daniel pulled out his old woodworking tools. He started with something small, a simple cutting board made from maple. He worked on it for 30 minutes each evening, sanding the wood smooth, oiling the grain. When he finished it 2 weeks later, he felt a pride he hadn't experienced in years. He'd made something. Started it and finished it. He gave the cutting board to his sister when he drove to visit her the following weekend. It was the first time he'd made the 3-hour drive in over a year. They spent the afternoon cooking together, talking about their childhood, laughing about their father's terrible jokes. As he drove home that evening, Daniel realized the heaviness in his chest had lifted. At work, something shifted too. Daniel found himself more focused during meetings, more creative in solving problems, more present with his colleagues. His boss noticed. In November, she asked him to lead a new project, something he would have declined 6 months earlier out of overwhelm. This time, he said yes. By winter, Daniel's mornings had become sacred. He protected them fiercely. He went to bed earlier to make the wake-up easier. He charged his phone in the kitchen instead of the bedroom. He bought better notebooks and a good pen. He found new routes for his morning walks, explored parks he'd never visited, watched sunrises that took his breath away. The 4 decisions had done something unexpected. It created space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to remember who he was beneath the routines and obligations. One January morning, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his notebook and realized he'd been keeping his morning practice for 4 months straight. Not perfectly. There were days he'd slipped, days he'd hit snooze or checked his phone too early. But he'd kept coming back. The decisions had become part of who he was. He wrote in his notebook, "I used to think I didn't have time to live the life I wanted. The truth is, I wasn't making time. I was giving my best hours to everything except what mattered most." These 4 decisions gave me myself back. Daniel learned something profound during those months. Focus isn't about doing more. It's about protecting what matters. Every morning, with those 4 simple decisions, he was making a statement about what he valued. His attention, his creativity, his health, his presence. And when you start your day by honoring what matters, the rest of your life begins to align. Here's what Daniel's story teaches us. Your morning doesn't belong to the world. It belongs to you, but you have to claim it. You have to make decisions that protect it. Because how you spend the first hour of your day isn't just about that hour. It's about the tone you set, the person you become, the life you build one morning at a time. The 4 decisions Daniel made weren't complicated. They didn't require money or special skills. They required something harder: commitment, the willingness to choose himself before choosing the demands of everyone else. Getting up on the first alarm trains you to honor your word. Leaving your phone builds sovereignty over your attention. Writing clarifies your thoughts and dreams. Moving your body reminds you that you're alive. 4 decisions made every morning. That changed everything. So let me ask you the same question Daniel asked himself that sleepless night. What kind of life do you actually want to live? And more importantly, what are you willing to decide every single morning to make that life real? Your answer starts tomorrow, when the alarm goes off, when you reach for your phone, when you choose between autopilot and intention. 4 decisions. That's all it takes to begin.